Window Watcher. I was 20, living alone on the ground floor of an apartment building. My living room windows faced a small parking lot for the building, which wasn't gated. I'd stay up late watching TV or playing games almost every night. It was winter when I first moved in, so I'd have the blinds down at night to help keep the cold air out. Summer came, and there was no AC in the apartment, so I'd open the windows and blinds at night for cool air. One night, I'm lying on the couch watching TV when I got that feeling of being watched. I looked over at the window, and a man had his hands and face pressed against the screen, merely feet away from where I was lying, just watching me. I let out a blood-curdling scream, and he didn't even blink. Terrified, I jumped up, grabbed the phone, and screamed that I was calling the cops. He still just stood there, completely motionless and dead-eyed. At that point, I yelled that I'm getting the neighbor and started walking to the door, and he finally took off. I locked the window and stayed up all night, completely on edge. My boyfriend at the time came over and stayed for a full week. He made sure to leave the blinds open and sat at the edge of the couch closest to the window to make it known I wasn't always home alone. The creeper didn't show up again, so eventually I got comfortable thinking it was an isolated incident of some rando wandering around the parking lot to break into cars. Maybe another 3 weeks after that, I got home late from waiting tables and I parked in the lot. I got changed, grabbed a snack, and headed to the living room to play games. I start to raise the blinds to open the windows and let in cool air. And the creeper is standing right there with his face pressed against the screen. I'm absolutely certain he was not standing in the parking lot when I pulled in, because I parked right by my window. I can only assume he was waiting around the corner of the building, watching me come home and timing my movements. This time, I grabbed the phone and immediately called the cops. I was shaking, crying, completely hysterical. Then the creeper takes off. Cops come and say they'll have someone patrol the block when they can, and my boyfriend immediately comes over. He wants to stay with me until I can get out of here, so I start looking at different apartments. About 3 to 4 weeks later, I have an apartment lined up on a high floor in a doorman building. My boyfriend had to go out of town for a few days, so I decided to go stay at my friend's place because I definitely wasn't going to stay at my place alone. I'm in my friend's house for 2 nights, but wanted to run home and grab a few things I had forgotten. She goes with me for obvious reasons, and we go in the afternoon, not after dark. We decide to hang out for a bit and play games together because it's daylight and there is activity around the building. No AC, of course, so I hesitantly raise the blinds to get some fresh air. I'm terrified opening them, then laugh to myself because I do it. And, of course, no one is there. I open the actual window and see 2 large holes cut into the screen right above the latches you push in to lift it. They weren't there 2 days ago. My blood ran entirely cold. The creeper knew my boyfriend was gone. He was watching and saw his car was gone. I left my car there as my friend picked me up, and we always left a light on in the living room to make the creeper think we were awake. So, he saw my car, thought I was home, saw the light on, yet proceeded to cut holes in the screen to break in. I have no idea if he actually gained access, but seeing how bold he was terrified me. I still sometimes ask myself, how long had he been watching me, learning my patterns, and getting gradually more aggressive with every interaction? I still sometimes get chills whenever I raise my blinds, and I can't help but think about it. Found a trapdoor inside my home. Several years back, I was cleaning out my house. I was renting a house for a year, and the year was almost up. I wasn't going to be living there next year, so it was time for me to start cleaning out and moving my stuff to my next place. The house that I had at the time was fairly small, but it was plenty of space for just me. I lived there by myself, and other than some basic furniture, I had just finished up cleaning out the living room and was moving on to clean the kitchen. There were quite a few cabinets, so many that I didn't end up using a good number of them. I was looking through all of them just to make sure that there was nothing left in them. One of them I opened up and I saw something in the back corner. It looked like some type of shirt or rag. I grabbed it and saw that I didn't recognize it, but when I moved it, it revealed a small white lever that I could barely see. The cabinet was in the corner, sort of by the sink and halfway blocked by the stove. I thought it was just another pipe, but it just looked a little different to me. I kneeled down to position myself to crawl inside the cabinet. It was actually pretty large, and once I got inside, I saw there was a small trap door to the side leading into the wall. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. You had to be completely inside in order to see all of it. And I decided to open the door, which led to an extremely narrow hallway with a sort of crawl space. But when I got further inside, I was horrified. I saw that there was food, as well as several blankets, as if someone had been living inside of there. The good news, at least to me, is that whoever was in there was gone. I tried to make sense of it. I tried to figure out how long the person had been there and how I just didn't even suspect it. I was gone from the house a lot with work and other stuff, but I didn't think it was possible for someone to be there without me even noticing. I continued cleaning until it got pretty late, and the next day after work, I continued. I was still kind of in shock with finding a secret room in my house, and decided to look at it once again. I opened the cabinet and went inside. Then, I pulled the lever open, just like I had the previous day. But this time, as soon as I opened it, I saw movement, and then I saw a person for a split second. They slammed the door back shut on me, and I immediately turned and ran all the way out of my house to my car, and then called the police. I was so terrified that I ended up driving away while I was on the phone with them. I told the police the whole situation, and they came to my house a short while later, just to find that whoever had been there was now gone. Luckily for me, I moved out the next week. I really don't know how long the person was living beyond that trap door and inside that crawl space, but I don't think I ever will. A man who watched me for over a year just kidnapped and assaulted someone. Nearly 2 years ago, my husband and I moved away to a pretty safe town. We decided to have some fun while we're young and child-free, so we got an apartment downtown. It's been really fun. It's on top of a shopping center with restaurants, boutiques, a theater, all kinds of stuff. We've had a blast living here and it's always felt very safe. I like to go on walks. Since the area is so busy, I've always just walked here when I'm alone. I go on a walk about every other day, less in the winter. Anyway, for 2 years, I've seen this older man sitting in the shopping center. He always gave me a really bad feeling, so if I came upon him, I tried to divert my path, but I felt bad for judging. I told myself, maybe I'm just paranoid. Maybe he's old and lonely and just wants to be around people. Well, the other night, there was a shooting in the shopping center. It was around 8 p.m., and I never go out that late by myself, so I didn't even know about it until the next morning. It turns out, that same older man had kidnapped a woman in that shopping center at gunpoint, assaulted her, and tried to drive away with her. Her husband drove after them and shot at the guy. She was rescued and the guy is currently in jail. He admitted to the police that he's been stalking that shopping center for victims, watching the women around there. I cannot tell you how many times in the past 2 years I have crossed paths with this man. How many times I felt guilty for feeling uncomfortable around him. How many times I was right in his path, an easy target. Landlord's boyfriend. So, I moved into a new house 18 months ago. It's actually right next door to my landlord. My cousin and my brother both live with me. About 3 weeks ago, my brother woke up in the middle of the night and decided to sit outside and have a cigarette. He said he heard the gate open and looked up, and the landlord's boyfriend was sneaking into the yard. My brother yelled at him, and he tried to act like he wasn't even there. My brother got up, and the guy ran back to their house. If this wasn't strange enough, he's been caught 4 times this week alone, putting his hand through the window and moving the blinds so that he can watch us. I caught him personally a few nights ago, standing on a box to peek into my bedroom. I put dead leaves under our windows so we can hear him, and it worked. We caught him sneaking behind our house at about 1 o'clock in the morning. The next morning, at around 7 a.m., I got a call from the landlord telling me to remove the leaves. They can't see the leaves from their house. You have to be behind my house to see them at all. It's kind of scary, and I've been sleeping with my gun and my dog. I feel like if I do anything about this, I will end up on the streets. It's almost impossible to find another rental where I live at the moment. I don't know what to do. Update. We are moving out of this place tomorrow. I left the house for 20 minutes today, and someone broke in. As of right now, I feel like I only have 2 choices. Either shoot the man, or leave in the morning. I am purchasing an RV tomorrow so that I have somewhere to stay, temporarily. I have little money saved and my boss is helping with the rest. I'm very thankful for everyone's advice and help. After I get all of my stuff out, I'm going to talk to the police and the property manager. Hopefully, she won't help them rent this to anyone else. A car with no door handles. Context. I was 26 and I'm a lady. I needed gas and it was around 11 p.m. on a Saturday. I pulled into a busy gas station to fill my tank, except it was completely bare with not a car in sight. I also live in Alaska and it was very cold this night, maybe 10 below. Anyway, tired after work and just wanting to get home, I usually start my pump and sit in the car due to the freezing cold, but this time, I had a weird feeling that I need to stand by the pump, so I did. I just started pumping my gas when a little golden sedan pulled up right next to me. I got out and I was feeling hyper vigilant for some reason. He started cleaning his completely clean windows. As he put back the squeegee, he made his way toward me. I felt like I wanted to run, but stayed calm and continued pumping. He asked me if I would help him put windshield wiper fluid in his car because he ran out and he doesn't know how to open the hood. I laughed it off and told him I don't know either, which was a lie. And he kept getting closer and closer to me while trying to lure me into his car by saying there's something under his seat he can't quite reach because he's too big. Now, I'm 5'2" and petite. This man was large and scruffy. Think Alaskan wilderness dude. At this point, I'm freaking out and hit the call button on the pump. He took a step back and started to go back to his car. I thought I was being smart. My gas is almost done. I looked in his car when I noticed the insides of the doors had no handles except for the driver door. At that point, I was even more freaked out. I was putting the pump back and opening my door when he was right behind me, slammed my door shut and yelled, "You're coming with me." I shouted no and was petrified. He grabbed my arm and slammed me against my car. I elbowed him as hard as I could and started to scream at the top of my lungs. Thank God for the gas attendant with a big ass gun that night, because if not for him, I don't know what would have happened. The attendant pulled the video and we called the police immediately. After that guy took off, I never heard anything else about it. I just hope he didn't get some other girl alone. Don't take rides from strangers. When I was about 15 or 16 years old, I was a real party animal. Always the next town over at a friend's place. Most of the time, I was able to stay at their place overnight and head home the next day, but there were a few occasions where I found myself walking home. This walk was roughly 2 to 3 hours long, but if it was a nice night, I didn't mind it at all. It gave me a chance to sober up before I got home. Obviously, my parents didn't know I was doing this. It was just me being a stupid teenager. At the time, there was a good 40-minute stretch that was pitch black with nothing but fields and forests on either side of the road. Every now and then, a car would pull over asking if I needed a ride home. Most times, I would say no thank you and go on my way with no issue. 2 times, cabs had offered me a ride home for a discounted price, and they were both amazing people. They told me about their wives and kids and how I should really be careful walking alone at night. They dropped me off at my house and made sure I got in before they drove away. One night, walking home on that stretch of dark road, minding my own business, a car pulled over in front of me. Not a big deal. This had happened before. As I was about to walk past the passenger side, the window rolled down. A guy in his mid-30s asked if I was all right. He was very clean, handsome, and his car looked brand new. He had a smile on his face and a weirdly friendly tone. Every hair on my body stood up. This seemingly normal guy was giving me one of the worst gut feelings I had ever gotten in my entire life. I backed up from the car as he spoke to me. Being polite, I told him I was all right and not too far away from home, but thanked him for his concern. The smile never left his face, but it was wrong, like it was being forced. He insisted that he could drive me home, and then said, "There are some scary people in this world," and laughed. By this point, my body is screaming that I need to get away from this person now. I faked a smile, thanking him again, saying goodbye and goodnight. I started walking away, pulling out my phone and pretended to call a friend. He sat in that spot for a little while before slowly creeping up beside me again, still giving me that weird smile. "Are you sure I can't drive you home?" I lied, saying I'm talking to my friend and that he was on his way, making sure I kept my distance from the car. "Oh, you can wait in the car with me," he said with a bit of an odd tone in his voice. Yet again, I declined his offer. My skin was crawling, and I'm sure you could hear the nerves in my voice. I continued with my fake phone call, loudly saying, "Oh, you're a few minutes away? Great, you'll see me." The driver's face went completely blank, his smile gone, not a single emotion in sight. He just looked forward, rolled up his window, and started driving away. I waited till he was out of sight before running as far away from that road as I could. I made it home safe that night, although the rest of the walk I was completely on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder and holding my phone up to my ear like I was talking to someone. Obviously, I can't ever really know what his intentions were, but if my gut was anything to go off of, I truly feel like if I got in that car, I would never go home again. So, a word of advice: trust your gut. I'm pretty sure the staff at Hobby Lobby saved my life today. I'm still shaking as I think about where I could have been right now had I not trusted my gut today in Hobby Lobby. I was at the store to indulge in the springtime sale. As I was browsing the entire store, I noticed that I kept seeing the same man wandering around. I thought that he was there with his wife until I realized that he was there alone. I also noticed that he had a Bluetooth headset in his ear the entire time. Not necessarily suspicious in and of itself, but I really started to get a bad feeling when he followed me around the small floral section as I wheezed through the aisles. He kept looking at random flowers when I would look at him. I even saw him either quietly talking to himself or talking to someone on his Bluetooth. Most likely the latter. I circled through the store several times to make sure that he was genuinely following me and to wait for him to leave before I went to check out. After a while of not being able to see him around me, I went up to the front and got in line. He crept from around a corner and got in line right behind me, still holding the 2 random flowers that he had picked up. The cashier rung up my items when I typed a note on my phone. I told her that I had an online coupon and showed her the note that said, "The guy behind me has been following me throughout the store." She said that she was going to get the manager to verify the coupon. The manager came up, read my note, and said, "With the other sale already applied, we might not be able to apply this coupon, but let's step aside and see what we can do." She took me past the register to get the details while the cashier rung up the man. I told her everything, and I looked back, and the guy is telling the cashier that he forgot something that he wanted. He then goes back to the floral section to add another random-ass stem to his items. He looks at me talking to the manager and tells the cashier that he needs something else and leaves the register again to get another random item. It was at this point that I knew that he was stalling to wait for me. The manager picks up on this too and calls up a male staff member to go out to the parking lot to make sure that the man got into his car and drove away. The guy paid for his 4 random flowers and left the store. The staff member came back in and verified that he drove away and offered to be in the parking lot until I safely drove away as well. He came out with me and pretended to grab carts until I had safely made it to my car and left. I'm so thankful to the staff that immediately jumped into discreet action to ensure my safety. Update, February 23rd. I have a few updates to share. After posting, getting a lot of people advised me to contact the police. I did. After I told them what happened, they told me that this guy was likely part of a human trafficking team. It was what they call the Scout, who was sent to find a target and was on the phone coordinating a team to grab me in the parking lot or follow me home. They said that these types of operations have specifically been targeting craft stores and places like Target, where women often go alone. They worked with Hobby Lobby and have security footage of his face and license plate. I'm not certain if they have identified him from this, but they've been great at keeping me updated. I also contacted Hobby Lobby corporate and gave them the store number and the names of the employees that helped me. They weren't specific, but they said that they would make sure that the employees got the recognition they deserved. Home invasion. Hi everyone. This incident happened about 5 years ago. This is a story that I never really tell anyone anymore because most people are either uncomfortable hearing it or make well-meaning comments about what I should have done in the situation without really understanding just how differently your mind works when you're experiencing absolute panic. But here's my story. I was living in a relatively nice apartment in downtown Memphis, working as an ophthalmic technician. I arrived home from work at my usual time, around 4:30 p.m., unlocked my door and went inside. I set my phone, wallet, and keys on the kitchen island, and heard my front door shut loudly behind me. I then began taking care of some errands around the house. Having grown up in a small town, it was a habit for me not to lock my door during the day, especially when I knew my husband would be home soon anyway. I've never forgotten to lock my door once in the 5 years since this day. I walked through my bathroom and into my large walk-in closet and began hanging up the laundry that I had started earlier in the day before work. My front door opened and I smiled with surprise. My husband was home a little early and I happily called out to him, but I was met with silence and slowly began to feel that sinking feeling of something is wrong crawling up my spine. I tried to shake it off, thinking that maybe my husband just didn't hear me, so I walked out into my living room area. Standing on the other side of my kitchen island was a complete stranger. He was male, older than me. I would guess around his 50s, but it's difficult for me to recall the exact facial features or details from this moment. And he was just standing there, staring at me. No ski mask, no weapon, just watching me. I wondered if he'd maybe walked into the wrong apartment and was going to apologize and leave, but as he continued to stare, I realized I needed to do something other than just gape at the stranger in my house. I stood taller, puffed up my chest in an attempt to look more threatening, which is hard to do as a small female, and used a loud, clear voice telling him to get out of my apartment, that he had no business being here. He completely ignored me, like I hadn't even spoken. Then he began to pick up my things, my cell phone, my keys, my wallet. He picked them up methodically and put them into his own pockets. That's when it truly hit me that this person was dangerous, and I was naive enough to believe this was all a mistake until that moment. I darted forward toward the only other device I had that would allow me to get help, my computer. I had to take a few steps closer to the intruder in order to reach it, but still had about 12 to 15 feet between us, so I knew I could grab it and run before he could reach me. As I picked it up and turned to run, I saw him start to move after me, and I sprinted back toward the bathroom because it was the only place I can go and put two locked doors between us, my bathroom door and the closet door. I slammed and locked the first door, and within seconds I could hear him messing with it, trying to pry it open. I ran into the closet and locked that door too, opening my computer and getting on Facebook Messenger to contact my husband. I sent message after message, pleading with him to call 911 and tell them that there was an intruder in the apartment. He got the messages within minutes and assured me that he had a dispatcher on the phone and was leaving work himself to try and get to me if he could. I waited and waited. The bathroom door opened and the intruder came inside. He moved to the closet door and started trying to break that door down too. Here's the part where people usually start giving me advice on how I should have acted, but all I can tell you is that I was frozen with fear, shock, but I didn't scream or cry or search for a weapon in that dark closet. I didn't brace the door or try to hold it closed. I just kneeled in my closet and waited to die because I just knew that's what was going to happen anyway. People like to tell me that I lived in an apartment. Surely if I had screamed, someone would have heard and came to help. Surely there was something heavy enough in my closet to use and defend myself. Hell, even the laptop I had would hurt if I swung it at someone. Why didn't I do anything? I don't really have an answer for that, but the closet door miraculously held. I heard frustrated footsteps go back out into the living area, things breaking, bottles shattering. My drawers, refrigerator, and cabinet doors were being flung open as things were torn out of them. I continued to sit in that closet, silently crying, wanting to leave but feeling that death was inevitable. I feel awful about my selfishness in that moment, but I messaged my mom, who lived a 15-hour drive away, and told her what was happening. I desperately wanted comfort and to tell her how much I love her. I'm not a parent, but I can only imagine the fear and helplessness I put her through, knowing her daughter was in danger and there was nothing she could do to help. She messaged me constantly, begging me to keep replying. I told her I would as long as I could, but I also told her to tell my brothers I love them. Tell my husband pushed through whatever happened next if it ended badly for me. The intruder started messing with the closet door again, mumbling to show it words that I couldn't really distinguish. I remember hoping that the police would get to the apartment before my husband, that he wouldn't be the one to find me in whatever state this invader left me in. The front door opened again, and it was my husband, shouting for me. The intruder walked out toward the living room, where the front door was located, and I opened the door and darted from the closet to find my husband on the ground with him, pinning him in place. The man kept mumbling, at times yelling, but never really put up much resistance. This entire part, though, is a blur for me. I remember feeling the room was spinning, filled with fear, mostly for my husband at this point. Eventually, the police found the apartment. It took them about 25 minutes to arrive, which still blows my mind. I know time seems to move slowly during scary situations, so I thought it was less than that. But from the time my husband dialed 911 to the time officers arrived, it was 25 excruciating minutes. This isn't intended to bash them in any way. It just felt like this was an unusually long response time for a home invasion. They got my belongings back from the man and took them out of my apartment. I numbly went through the process of filing a police report, telling them what happened. One of the officers commented that I should really keep my door locked at all times. I remember feeling like he was being insensitive at the time, or blaming me for what happened, but I later recognized his words were coming from experience. I'm sure he's seen the situation end differently for other women. Within 30 minutes, the scariest incident of my life was over, but I've carried the fear, the violation, the anxiety of having someone intrude my space for years. If it happened to me once, it could happen again. If this or something similar has happened to you and you're still struggling with the aftermath of it, the sleepless nights, the laying awake listening for sounds of forced entry, the nightmares, the constant checking and rechecking your locks, this is what eventually helped me. A year after this took place, my husband and I moved to the Midwest for his job. We selected a safe town with a nice apartment complex and chose a third-floor apartment with only one point of entry. I looked up every statistic on crime for the neighborhood, finding that an isolated incident of car theft was the only thing reported in decades. I still couldn't sleep at night. It was definitely better than staying in the same apartment in Memphis, but my husband often works night shifts now, and I simply couldn't continue being terrified to sleep at night. I realized my biggest fear wasn't that something could happen, but that if it did, I was just as unprepared now as I was then. I hadn't changed anything other than locking my door, and I knew I would likely freeze up again, and leave my life up to being able to hide well enough, or having a door hold long enough to save me. And that was just unacceptable. I walked into a martial arts school with an excellent self-defense program, introduced myself, and started taking classes. At first I was quiet, hiding in the back room and generally keeping to myself. My instructor, who was both incredibly kind and incredibly insightful, slowly built up my confidence and brought me out of my bubble of fear. After several months of training, I finally shared my reason for taking classes with him, and he's worked with me tirelessly to give me the ability to protect myself in any environment. I've been training for years now, and the difference it has made in every aspect of my life is unbelievable. The meek, quiet girl that waited to die in her closet doesn't exist. I'm confident, I'm strong, I'm worthy of living and protecting myself in my home, and I'm no longer ashamed of how I handled the situation I was in, but also understand what steps I can take to ensure that I'm safe. Home intrusion happened right under my roommate's nose while I was at work. I came home from work today to receive some very unsettling news from one of my roommates. It started when I went to let the dogs out into the backyard. Our back door is in the kitchen, so on my way to let them out, I passed by the oven and noticed that it was on. It surprised me a bit because my roommate Mandy was the only other person home, and she had been spending most of her time in her room due to feeling ill. Even so, I figured that I'd better ask her first before turning it off, just in case she was actually using the oven. I went to the end of the hallway where her room was, knocked on her door, and asked, "Hey, is the oven supposed to be on? Like, are you using it right now?" Confusion and concern was immediately apparent in her face as she replied, "What? No, I haven't even been out in the kitchen today." I shared her confusion and concern upon hearing this, but then pondered the possibility that Carl, her brother, and our other roommate had been the one to leave it on by mistake. I asked her if this could be the case, and she told me that Carl was still at work, and he had been since early that morning. This was when she and I began to piece together that something very strange had to have happened. I told her that I had just gotten home a few minutes prior. It was a little after 3 a.m. at that point, and I had left the house at about 7:30 in the morning. She then informed me with horrific realization that at around 11 a.m., she had heard noises coming from the living room, including a woman's voice, a chair moving, and the front door opening. She didn't realize at the time that I was at work, so she just assumed it was me, and I didn't think much of it. She then mentioned that in hindsight, though, the dogs were barking an unusual amount during this time. I asked her how long the noises coming from the living room went on, and she said that it was hard to tell because she was trying to sleep at the time, but if she had to guess, they lasted about 20 minutes. Mandy, Carl, and myself are the only current residents of this home. And as mentioned before, Carl and I were both at work during that time frame, so Mandy was the only person who reasonably should have been in the house. I thanked her for informing me of this and then went back to the front half of the house and did a quick comb of the area to check for anything else that looked out of place or missing. I didn't discover anything else out of the ordinary, and as of the time of this posting, February 15th, 2022, nothing else has come of it. Update. February 17th, 2022. Pretty minor, but still pretty weird. I went to the hall closet to get more toilet paper from a bathroom, and I noticed an empty wrapper or packaging for a new pillow in there. I didn't buy a new pillow recently, so I asked both of my roommates if they did. Mandy told me that she bought a new pillow about a month ago, but she threw the packaging away. This is my first time noticing the packaging in that hall closet, and I last went into the hall closet just a couple weeks ago, if I remember correctly. Update March 4th, 2022. New information and events have emerged that are almost certainly connected to this incident. Late last night, I woke up from a nap to find that Mandy and Carl were seemingly angry about something. They were initially in the living room, but then stormed back into Mandy's room immediately after I walked in, and I just heard pounding and cursing. I inferred from this that they were angry at me and started wondering about the possible reason. In any case, a few minutes later, Carl walked out to the living room where I was and told me, "Don't worry, we're not angry at you," and then returned to Mandy's room and said, "I have something very important to tell you," before he entered it. Flash forward another short while later, and the two of them walk back into the living room, looking like they have something to talk to me about. They inform me that a source close to them has recently confirmed that there has indeed been someone who's been standing outside the house and watching our home at odd hours. They've yet to directly catch them in the act, but they can tell it's happening based on hearing noises and the reaction from our dogs. There had been a few more strange instances in the past few days leading up to this. First, when I woke up from an after-work nap one night, I went into the living room to find that all the lights had been unplugged and the bulbs loosened. I also found that the lock on the door leading out to the garage had been jammed. Then, a little while later, while I was in the kitchen making dinner, I found that the microwave and the toaster were both unplugged. The lights being unplugged thankfully turned out to have an innocent explanation. That was just Carl trying to save on the electric bill. But when I asked him about the microwave and toaster oven, he had no idea. He said he didn't do that, and he doesn't think Mandy did either. He tried to reason that they might have become unplugged by accident, but frankly, I very much doubt that. The part of the wall where they're plugged in is at a little corner that gets virtually no hand traffic, so to speak. On top of that, the microwave plug is thick and sturdy. Certainly not the type to accidentally come unplugged just from someone bumping it with their hand. So, with all that considered, the idea that they could have come unplugged by accident simply wasn't plausible. As for the lock on the door to the garage being jammed, that had the creepiest explanation of all. I had forgotten to ask about it the last time that I was asking about the other stuff being unplugged, but they ended up bringing it up last night when they were filling me in on everything else. They told me that they had found the door out in the garage that leads to the backyard unlocked. None of us have used that door in months, so someone had undoubtedly picked the lock on that door and gotten into the garage, at the very least. Their discovery to this led them to take the extra precaution of double locking the door that leads to the garage from indoors. Mandy also brought up to me an extra chilling detail about the previous incident that she had forgotten to mention until then. You may recall that one of the sounds she heard coming from the living room was a woman's voice. Well, she informed me that the voice she heard sounded a lot like mine, and on top of that, it sounded muffled, as though it was coming from a recording. This means that there is a very real possibility, even likelihood, that whoever was behind this had somehow obtained a recording of my voice and was purposely using it to make it seem as though I was the one in the living room at the time. They even seemed to have an idea about who it was, but remained vague about that, presumably not wanting to jump to any conclusions. I was able to gather that they definitely believe it to be a man, though. However, upon further discussion, we came to the conclusion that there are likely multiple people involved. A theory we all had to varying degrees was that Carl's ex, Ashley, is behind this in some way. She and Carl had a very nasty breakup last summer, and she's displayed unhinged behavior towards him and Mandy ever since. including breaking in on 2 separate occasions. After the second time, Carl finally got a protective order against her, but that hasn't stopped her from seemingly trying to get around it. She hasn't directly shown up during times that we're home, but she has been texting both of them from unknown numbers off and on a few times, and even managed to hack their Facebook accounts just a couple months ago. On top of all that, Carl has confirmed that Ashley does indeed know how to pick locks. I also noticed and point out that all the major incidents seem to be occurring during times I'm not home, and brought up the suggestion that this could be deliberate. One of my friends who I had described the situation to had said that if this person is indeed deliberately carrying out their acts when I, specifically, am not home, it likely indicates that their vendetta is only against Mandy and Carl, and they do not want me involved in the crossfires. That lends credence to the theory of Ashley being involved. For all her anger and erratic behavior towards Mandy and Carl, she never had a single negative interaction with me personally. She showed fondness for me, and we parted ways without any hard feelings after Carl ended things. When I explained all this to Mandy and Carl, they found that it made a lot of sense. As for the reason we believe there are multiple people involved, as previously mentioned, the person who's been the main one watching our house seems to be a man, but the one actually picking the locks and entering is most likely Ashley herself, or maybe one of her female friends, since they would have light enough tread to more effectively slip in and out secretly. A lot of this is still speculation, but given all the circumstantial evidence, I have a feeling we're not far off with our intuition of what's happening. My coffee shop stalker. A little bit of background. I, 23 female, was 20 at the time. I moved in with my uncle in San Antonio, Texas, with the agreement that I wouldn't have to pay rent as long as I helped him out with chores and my cousins. I got a job at a super well-known coffee chain downtown close to the touristy part of the area. We had a lot of regulars and a lot of homeless coming in and out. I felt relatively safe though because I got to know the people there and it was almost always a lot of foot traffic. I used to even take walks after work in the area, especially since I was super close to the Riverwalk. Skip to a couple months into the job, and I was friends with everyone I worked with. We were all super close. On this particular day, it was one of my coworkers' last day. There were about 3 guys who had been there almost all morning. They hadn't bought anything, they were just hanging out, which I guess wasn't really unusual for my location. On my break, I decided to walk down to a nearby drugstore so I can get a farewell card and maybe a small gift for said coworker. I walked out and put my earbuds in, and before I could press play, I hear the door open behind me and footsteps following behind. Whoever it was caught up to me and started walking beside me, matching my pace exactly. I turned to look, and it was one of the guys that had been there all morning. He was a bit taller than me and reminded me of Lakeith Stanfield. He tried to ask for my number, and I kindly told him no. He persisted, and I, with a short temper, told him to fuck off. He stopped and stared at me in surprise, as I don't look like someone who speaks up or who would be rude. He stood there as I walked away, and by the time I got back, they were gone. I proceeded to tell my coworkers about the encounter, and we laughed it off. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. Every shift after that, he would already be there just hanging out or would walk in mid-shift. Sometimes with somebody else, sometimes by himself. I assumed it was just another homeless person because how else was he always able to be around? My shifts were sporadic. Some days I opened, some days I closed. Some days I worked mid, but it didn't matter. He was always there. At that point, I started feeling paranoid. I would always catch him staring in my direction. He never ordered anything, never talked to me, but luckily he never followed me. He just stood there, watching me. I started mentioning it to my coworkers, and they started noticing it too. One of my team leaders would help me out by sending me to do dishwasher tasks in the back or organize a cooler. My coworkers would also try and place themselves to try and block me from his view. And I started feeling uncomfortable at work. Sometimes when I closed, a coworker would walk me out to my car before heading home themselves. Or if I didn't close, they would walk me to my car and turn around and head back to work. Then, one day of him just staring, I was working the register that day. He walked up and ordered a water. I asked for his name in his order. I now had his first name, just in case. He took his water and sat down. I had mentioned him before to my manager, but because he hadn't really done anything, we couldn't do anything besides note it in the manager book. The next day, I worked with my manager. It was him, 2 other coworkers, and me. I told them I had to go to the bathroom real quick. There were 2 bathrooms right next to each other, but sort of hidden from the coffee bar and register, and they weren't gender specific. I walked around the bar to the lobby area. I had to pass his table and walk down the lobby to get to the bathrooms. I noticed him get up before going inside the bathroom. I sat down to do my business when someone rattled the knob. I shouted out that it was occupied, but whoever it was kept rattling the door until I finished. When I opened the door, no one was there, and walking back, I noticed him adjusting back into his chair. I was super freaked out and told my boss. He couldn't tell him anything because we had no proof that it was him. Later that shift, he got up and picked up a coffee from the pickup area. My boss assumed he had ordered it and let him take it. I told him it wasn't, and that it wasn't even his name. My boss used this as an opportunity to tell him that if he does something like that again, he can't come back. The man apologized and actually stuck to the rules every day after that. He went back to just watching me. Cut to Valentine's Day. One of my team leaders and I would be scheduled to work certain Thursdays after close to deep clean the store. We would stay until 1 a.m. This was one of those Thursdays. We were almost done and I had to clean the bathrooms as one of the last chores. I finished, and as I walked out the bathroom, I see him peeking in with both his hands pressed to the window, eyes wide, just staring at me with this super intense look. I froze for a second, just staring back. I noticed on one of his palms that is pressed to the window, a purple foam heart. He doesn't move at all. I freak out and shout, "Hannah, Hannah, he's here. He's back." She barely hears me through the music we were blasting. Hannah was the team lead who would help me hide from him, so she knew the huge fear I had towards him. She walks towards the bathroom shouting, "What are you saying? What's going on?" As soon as she gets close, she sees him. I told her again, "He's here. He's watching me." She started shouting through the window, "You need to leave. If you don't leave, we're calling the police." I stepped back into the bathroom and my lead continues to shout at him to leave and threatens him with the police. About 5 minutes pass and he realizes that I'm not stepping out until he leaves, so he does. The next day, my lead and I told the manager I want to file a police report, but he tells me no, to wait until he talks to his boss. He shows up again that day, but I was only there to talk to my manager and leave right after. When I got home, a friend convinced me to call the cops, so I text my boss that I don't care what he or his boss says. I'm scared and I'm going to file that report. I dial 911, tell them a summarized version, and they tell me they're going to send someone to where I live to take the official report. The 2 officers were so nice and supportive. I told them my whole story and how my boss didn't feel the need to get cops involved since I wasn't harmed. The officers told me that I should have called right away and defended me, saying that they can get him for harassment. I thanked them, and they tell me that if he shows up, to dial 911 so they can take him in for trespassing and harassing. I think that day my manager banned him and warned him because he never showed up to the coffee shop again. A few months later, when I was comfortable again with downtown, I went out with some friends to walk around. We were close to where I worked, and as we round a corner, I see him. And so I ducked into a little corner store, and my friends follow. I told them I saw him, and they kept an eye out. Once he was out of view, we left the store, and that was the last time I saw him. Creepy neighbor is stalking me. Background. March 8th, 2022. I, 24-year-old female, live with my roommate, who's a 23-year-old female, in an apartment in the suburbs of Atlanta. As you may know, Atlanta is super dangerous and crime-riddled right now. So we have a Ring peephole camera, which is perfect for apartments, and a digital lock on our door for safety. Now, onto the story. About 3 months ago, this sweet family from across the hall moved out, and we got a new neighbor. His name is David, and let's just say he's interesting. When we first saw him moving in, we were a bit taken aback by the sheer amount of stuff he was trying to fit in his one-bedroom apartment. All of it was anime merch and Star Wars memorabilia. Definitely gives me hoarder vibes, but not my business. When the moving trucks left and a few days had passed, my roommate and I knocked on his door to give him a welcome to the neighborhood gift basket with some baked goods, dog treats, and bags for his dog, as well as seasonal candles. Apparently, this was not the correct thing to do. After that day, David got creepy. It started out innocent enough. He would come to the door whenever he heard me or my roommate coming or going to have a quick chat. Or he would come over regularly to ask for salt, sugar, and toilet paper. Sometimes he would ask if we could come over and watch his dog, but within the past 2 weeks, things have really escalated. 2 weekends ago, we were out pretty late partying at the bars near the Brave Stadium. We ended up getting home around 3 a.m., only to find David sitting at the top of the stairs, waiting for us. He acted all upset, asked us where we had been, and requested that we tell him if we were planning to be out past midnight. I laughed in his face, and he called me a mindless Stacy. He also asked for access to our Ring camera, so he could make sure we were safe. We laughed at him again and went into our apartment. Here's the scary part. We checked the Ring the next morning, and he sat outside his apartment staring at our door for the rest of that night. When we saw that, we contacted the complex to let them know that he was acting crazy. They told us to contact the police, so we did. And the police told us to contact them if he made any threats, but since we lived in a shared space, they couldn't do anything until he entered our apartment or threatened us. I assumed the complex said something to him because he left us alone for the next 5 days or so. This week, he is out of control. He is constantly sitting outside of our apartment. My roommate has started leaving for work an hour earlier so that she doesn't cross paths with him. I cannot leave the apartment during the day because he is constantly waiting outside for me. He has asked me out, left love letters on our door, on our cars, and in our mailbox. I told him once that I wasn't interested, and he told me that he would kill himself if I didn't go on a date with him. Of course, I don't have that in writing, so the police won't do shit. He has also put up a Ring doorbell of his own so he can track all of our movements, and will leave really creepy sexual notes when we're gone so we find them when we come back. Update, March 14th, 2022. We met with our landlord last week. Unfortunately, they aren't willing to work with us as much as we expected. They will not remove him from his unit, and since we don't want to spend a ton of money to leave, we asked if we could move units within the complex. The landlord offered us a one-bedroom unit on the terrace level, so my roommate and I would have to share a room in what is basically the basement of our building. Not ideal. We spoke to the police, and they said that the notes and letters weren't enough to get someone on stalking or harassment, especially since he lives literally 3 feet away from us. They did keep the Ring videos and said that they would contact us sometime this week after they reviewed all of the footage. We have both moved in with my parents for the time being. Shout out to them for being incredible parents. It really sucks spending $2,000 plus monthly on a place you can't live. We are actively looking for other apartments, but money is tight since we would have to buy out the current lease and pay to start a new one. Also, not ideal. So, not the update we were hoping for, but we are both safe now, and that's what's important. Update, March 18th, 2022. We broke the lease, and we're moving far away. Creepy guy at my door. A few nights ago, I, a 44-year-old woman, and my 20-year-old daughter were at home together. It was just us girls because my son, my nephew, and my boyfriend were all out. The night was cold and rainy. My daughter was in the kitchen baking, and I was chatting with her for a bit. I realized that it was getting late, a little after 10 p.m., so I decided to go take a shower. I went into my ensuite and had just turned the water on when I heard my daughter calling me in a hushed but frantic tone. I threw on my robe and came out of the bedroom. She told me that someone was on the deck, knocking on the door. This was very strange for a few reasons, but especially because you have to come all the way into my yard and around the side of the house to get to the deck. I was immediately alarmed. It was late. We weren't expecting anyone, and any normal person would go to the front door. The door to the deck is solid, but there's a window right next to it. I peeked through the window and saw a large man with his hood up. He was carrying a bag. He had just started knocking again, so I said, "Hello?" And he responded, "Yes, can you open the door, please?" I asked him, "Who are you looking for?" He said, "Can you please open the door so that we can talk?" I repeated more sternly, "Who are you looking for? Do you know someone who lives here?" He said, "I'm looking for a woman. Are you a mother? Please just open the door." At this point, I was ready to call the police, but realized that I had left my phone in the bathroom. My daughter was standing nearby, watching all this happen with a very worried look on her face. I shouted, "You need to leave right now." He didn't reply, but he continued to stand at the door in silence for what felt like an eternity. I whispered to my daughter, "Go grab my phone from the bathroom." And just then, he walked towards the stairs to leave. I ran into the living room, which has a window that faces the front of the house, and watched as he walked out of the yard. It dawned on me that the deck is attached to the kitchen, and he could have been watching us through the window before he started knocking the entire time. When the guys came home, we told them what happened. They were as concerned as we were, and my nephew happens to be a police officer. They immediately went outside to search the yard, but the strange guy was long gone. Now, we're buying external cameras for the house this weekend. Home invader left us a terrifying message. This happened to me when I was about 10 years old, but even now as an adult in my 30s, I remember it like it was yesterday. My parents had taken my sister and I out to a movie, and then to get ice cream in celebration of my older sister getting straight A's on a report card. I remember my dad had gotten off work later than usual, so by the time the movie was over and we had our ice cream, it was well past our bedtime. But it didn't matter though. My parents were happy and proud of my sister. We had a great time and we took our time getting home. If it wasn't for what happened when we got home, I would have always looked back on that night fondly. We got back at around 10:30 p.m. Bedtime was usually 10, so I went straight to my room to put my pajamas on while my sister went to brush her teeth. I remember thinking that it seemed a little more chilly in the house that night, but that's the only thing out of the ordinary I can recall from when we first walked in. I barely had a chance to change when I heard my dad yell our names from what I thought was from the kitchen. I didn't know what was wrong, but I knew it was bad because I heard fear in his voice for the first time ever. It terrified me. I bolted out the door and into the kitchen as fast as I could. My sister was already there, and her and my parents were standing very close. My mom looked like she was on the verge of panic, and she motioned for me to come close. She wrapped her arms around my sister and I, and my dad was already dialing on the house phone. Then, I noticed some glass on the floor. I asked what was wrong, but she didn't want to tell me. She said we needed to go outside right away. As we headed out the front door, I heard my dad talking to a 911 operator and telling them that when we got home, he found our back sliding glass door shattered and objects strewn about the kitchen. We went to the neighbor's house and waited for the police to come. After a few minutes, my dad joined us. He seemed to be well shaken up, which was a new sight to me. The police arrived and searched the house extensively. It was a big scene with all our neighbors outside and flashing lights illuminating our entire street for hours. They never found anybody in our house. Whoever had been there had come and gone. The thing that gets to me is that nothing was stolen. Whoever it was didn't want any of our possessions. What they did take was our canned food out of the pantry and stacked them into small pyramids on our kitchen counter. They also turned on the TV in the basement and moved a few random objects to different parts of the house. Super creepy. It was like an insane person had been in our home and did things for reasons that only made sense to them. As the police were finishing up and ready to leave, I heard one of them ask my mom a question. They talked quietly, and I'm sure they thought I didn't hear. I pretended not to be listening, but I heard everything. You see, we kept magnetized letters on our fridge, and we would use them to leave each other messages for fun sometimes. The cop was asking my mom if the message on there right now was done by any of us. It wasn't. I watched my mom turn pale when he told her what it said. It still makes my skin crawl to this very day. It read, "Always watching." The police didn't find any fingerprints. They said the intruder had to have been wearing gloves. For the next few days, the entire family was extremely uneasy, as you might imagine. I was absolutely positive the intruder was still in the house somehow, that there was a hidden place nobody knew about, where they could hide and listen to us. I never shook the feeling that somebody was there. Within a few months, we decided to move. It was all just too scary for us to stay in that area. We moved to a house several miles away. We were never bothered again, but I do still think about it. Was it kids playing a prank? Was it some insane person that wanted to torment a random family? Or was it someone that truly had it out for us and who really was always watching? These questions still kept me up at night sometimes. This happened many years ago, but the hairs on my neck stand up sometimes when I'm alone at home. And I have to check the house to make sure no one is hiding.